And the neighborhood I grew up in, very interesting. As a little as a young man, when I was 5 or 6, my father and them lived on Fairfax Street, and the property was heir property owned by a great grandfather and all of them. So it was passed down through the family. It was a big old family house with my father and his kids and my aunt Dorothy Turner and her kids. We all lived in the same house. Had probably an acre of land or two behind us where we actually had beautiful pear trees, apple trees, and we grew some of our fruit. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We had a refrigerator box that sat on the side of the house, and the Iceman would come, and who was one of them, who's my grandfather, and put a block of ice in the ice box, as they called it, so that we could keep the produce cold. We also had pipes that came up like a well for our water. Alexandria then at that time was some of the homeowners, like my great grandfather who kept the property, eventually lost it because of taxes. So we moved to Alexandria into public housing, where I lived in the 700 block of Columbus Street, right across from St. Joseph School. That was the newest public housing units that they built at the time. And it was all black public housing. Now, the amazing thing is they had white public housing off of West and Braddock Road, which was separate, but they was under the same housing department, but they was separate neighborhoods. And after the 1960 and I would say in the 70s, it began to change where public housing became integrated. I'm not. The question used to be when I was a young man was what happened to all the white kids we knew that lived in public housing? Because we played ball and stuff with each other, even though we lived in separate neighborhoods. But when they integrated, I think a lot of the white public housing people moved further south and left. Um, but having grown up in that neighborhood and constantly dealing with, for example, the public housing in the Berg, which is right closer to the waterfront, was always an issue of how well they kept up the public housing. One of the things that was kind of odd was that the Alexandria City Jail was located in the Berg, right off of Patrick O'Royal Street, right in Old Town Alexandria. In fact, the jail was right across the street from public housing. If the police got a call for something going on, they didn't even send a squad car. They just ran across the street, locked up somebody, and ran back and put them in the jail. So it was a bad taste in Alexandria's black community about the jail. You could actually walk by and guys that you knew would be howling out the window and say, Andy, have my sister bring my shoes down to the jail or a coat because I got to go to court the next day. It became an issue so much that when I came back, I would say, very militant coming out of Vietnam because they didn't allow black soldiers to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And I couldn't understand that. It created a bad feeling. So in 1973, I ran for sheriff in Alexandria. I was the first black person to actually run for sheriff. It came about because of some meetings I had with the young black, at the time we were early 19, 20, well, I would say 22, 23, because I was out of Vietnam. I had worked in Al Robinson's campaign. I had been active in Alexandria's community and City Hall. And we had a meeting that we should try to take over the jail. And somebody put my name up and said, Andy, why don't you run? And I did. Actually, I took on the job and ran in the Democratic primary against a gentleman by the name of Raymond Fogle. I was 26 years old at the time. He was 65. The whole idea was that even if I lost by the next 4 years, he would probably retire and I would have the job. I don't think I really wanted to be a sheriff as much as my thoughts was that if I won, Alexandria had a police department, so I didn't have to go and arrest people. The job of the sheriff was to maintain the city jail and the prisoners that were in there. My thoughts was that I would become the sheriff and I would give me 3 or 4 years, a 4-year term. And during that term, I was going to go to law school. And I figured if I could finish up law school after those 4 years, I'd move on to something else. Alexandria was a unique jail. The Fourth Circuit Court was right above the post office in Alexandria. I could remember living in Alexandria at that age. I was 26. I was living with my wife at that time and son, and we lived in Alexandria off of Princess Street. And one day during the campaign when I was running, I got a knock on the door, and it was two gentlemen, and they were FBI agents. They actually looked like FBI agents with the gray pants and the blue jacket, and they came in, and we sit down and talked. And they told me that they had prisoners that were being held there, like plane hijackers, anybody who had a federal charge, but they were only being housed there until they actually had that day in court. And then if they were found guilty, they was moved on to prison. But it was important for them to tell me if I won, that they had a relationship with the city, that they gave the city a few $100,000 to maintain those prisoners at that jail, regardless if there's 1 or 100 in there. And they told me that while they knew I was running for office, they bought a poster, which is, I still have. It's a poster that with my face on it. And if I had a thing just to show it, it had a poster with my picture, and in the picture, Evans for sheriff had bullet holes in it. And when they bought the picture, I saw these little bullet holes, and they said, "Well, look, we can't protect local candidates who are running for public office, but we want you to be aware that some of the posters were found on the other side of the city." And it was a picture of me and this Jewish guy who was the first Jewish guy to try to run for the mayor. Both of us had taken a picture together, and it created a storm in Alexandria. So the Klan, I think it was George Lincoln Rockwell was the big racist anti-black group at the time. And when I saw the picture with my holes in my face, I don't think I was intimidated too much because I was a Vietnam veteran, and I'd experienced war, and I experienced being in situations where you just had to survive the way you can. So I wasn't intimidated, but I was concerned, but I lived within the black community, and I didn't feel that they would come within the black community to attack me. However, I did go across the city and speak on what my candidacy was all about. I had notes that was passed up to me telling me, "Nigger, if you win, we're going to take care of you," and things like that. Coming out of the 70s, 60s, it wasn't shocking. I just figured that, yeah, well, that's another battle that we just have to deal with. But I wasn't going to be intimidated by getting out of the race just because of all this racial and bias was coming at me. I ended up losing the race by 106 votes. I remember going over to the White Masonic Temple, the lodge of the Masonic Temple lodge on Cameron Street, and congratulating Raymond Fogel, who was a sheriff, that he won his office again. And I remember walking in there, and a hush came over the whole room, and I guess because nobody black had ever been in there. He was having his victory party there. And I just felt, as a gentleman, I would congratulate him, not knowing that there was a unspoken law, I guess, that blacks were not allowed in there. So when I walked in, he suggested to the people to let me in, and I walked through the crowd, and it was very quiet. But after I congratulated him, people clapped, and when I walked out, they shook my hand, and we talked. I always had a feeling that it's just a lack of communication between the communities, black and white, that people took sides, and we just didn't sit down at tables and break bread and talk. And after that run, I think I was more geared toward becoming a counselor, and I moved my direction from performing arts to becoming a counselor, and got my background in courses and how to negotiate and problem solve. Alexandria still has a lot of change that has occurred, and we now have, as I understand, a black female who is the mayor, which I say kudos to the city for electing a person who was qualified regardless of race, creed, or color. So we have to recognize Alexandria as being a city that has been more of a, you could be a microscope of how America could, if the next generation don't feel ashamed of the history. I've heard people say, well, I didn't beat the slaves, so why should I? I don't think it's about what they did to us in the past, is whether or not we come together as a city. And in most cities, and Alexandria's show is at least demonstrating the effort to have city fathers that are women who can at least have input. If we're not at the table, then our concerns are not met. So for a young man to come through this city and have seen change in a way that has been slow but continuous, I think Alexandria is a unique city in all those regards because of its years of dealing with national issues like slavery and how this city was going to change and how it has changed. And even during the riots, it was so funny. D.C. was burning in 1968 when Dr. King died. 7th Street was on fire. And I remember myself thinking, boy, they are rioting in Alexandria that I heard, but it didn't really happen. The biggest incident was when a young man was shot at a 7-Eleven in Del Rey. And the store clerk who shot him created a big stir, and the black community went into rage and commenced the burning several buildings on Washington Street where John L. Lewis's house was, and some of the things never really did any major damage. But I always said Alexandria's black community really didn't know how to riot because the brothers went down there and threw Marlboro cocktails in the brickyard. Everybody was like, why'd y'all throw bricks, Marlboro cocktails in the brickyard? Y'all just make the bricks warm. Oh my gracious. It has had its moments of real tension, but have also been able to put that aside and see what Alexandria's could really be like. And I think we're seeing it more and more. There are signs that are all over the Alexandria now that highlights blacks and their participation. Young gentleman by the name of MacArthur Myers, who has been very persistent and recognizing our history, and on all the walking trails you can read about black participation in this town. And I think if the word, I'm an Alexandrian, is what I am, so I'm proud to say I'm not, certainly my race is black, but I am an Alexandrian. And I think the pride of being an Alexandrian growing up in this town still holds true with me. And that's why I'm kind of proud to be able to talk about my family and its history in relationship to this city.